What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the E-Commerce Influence Podcast. My name is Austin Brawner, and I am fired up to bring you this episode today with Taylor Holiday. Taylor Holiday is the founder of Common Thread Collective, and they have a bunch of businesses that they run. He is an agency owner, Common Thread Collective. He owns 4x400, where they acquire and they invest and grow brands. And also the owner of Admission, which is a training membership community for people trying to grow in paid social. And he's also an NFT enthusiast. And the reason I want to bring him on was because he's been tweeting and talking a lot about NFTs and their place in this changing sphere of e-commerce. And so I wanted to bring him on and talk about it. This is part of my series about the Metaverse, about Web 3.0. It's a fascinating conversation. You're going to learn a lot more about NFTs and how you might be able to use those to combat margin pressure. He shares some really good examples. I think you're going to love this episode. It's excellent. It's super in-depth. We go all around, and we also talk about what they've been seeing with Facebook and some of the impacts on their clients, and what's actually behind the numbers. So what you can expect and the type of impact they're going to see. So it's an excellent episode. Let's bring Taylor into the show and kick this thing off. All right, Taylor, man, and welcome to the show. Excited to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely. Austin, thanks for having me, man. Excited to take a little trip out to the future and see what we can find together.
Take a trip to the future. Yeah, man, I'm excited to talk with you. I've seen you on Twitter. We've seen each other from afar. I've watched you build this large business at Common Thread Collective with like continued levels of growth in the vision and what seems like endless energy. You guys always have like new projects rolling out, and you still have time to like tweet about NFTs. So it's impressive, man. And I'm really excited to chat with you.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can connect some dots on why those things, I believe, might be more connected than they might appear on Twitter. Because it may seem like lazy line cartoon pictures and chaos, but I actually think that it's going to be a big part of all of our futures here.
That they're very much connected. Well, I agree as well. And this is where I'm kind of exploring. This is one of the episodes. I'm doing a little series on the Metaverse and cryptocurrencies, decentralized finance, NFTs, how they all go together and what business owners should care about. So we'll get into that. But first I want to talk a little bit about Common Thread Collective and what you've got going on there. Because you've got it seems like three parts. You've got CTC, you've got an agency, which seems like the agency. You've got 4x400 and Admission as your membership. How did you get to this point? And did you always have this large vision that it was going to grow into this way, or is this kind of evolved naturally?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we grew up on the brand side, right? So before any of the agency stuff, we built two fairly large e-commerce businesses in Power Balance and Kalo. And so that was our initial foray into that world. And we did it, I'm saying we in reference to a group of partners, as younger single folks, where sort of building a business was like it's kind of like going to college. It's your whole life. Every waking second, every weekend, you're at a different thing, and you just sort of don't know any different, and you love it, and it's your friends, and it's just sort of all consuming. And then we sort of grew up and had families and kids and realized that we still had the same passion for building and growing things, but probably didn't have the same space to offer. And so we wanted to dream about doing it differently. And so we sort of conceptualized this idea of an ecosystem that would sort of serve itself, in the sense that the agency would be about information arbitrage and talent development for eventually building our own stuff in 4x400, and then how that might come to life in teaching and content. And, we have early drawings of versions of the thing that it is now, but it is certainly evolved over time, right? Like these things don't ever manifest exactly as you seem. But the idea that there would be sort of an ecosystem of businesses that would be symbiotic to each other was always what we set out to do.
Cool. Well, this is a question that I think not everybody can answer, because there's a lot of times people on the agency side and people on the brand side.
Yeah.
But you've been on both, right?
Yeah.
What's the biggest difference between running an agency and running a brand or an e-commerce business?
This is a controversial take that I have that I don't know that I would say everybody agrees with me, but I do think I have a little bit of a unique perspective, having lived both lives pretty intimately at scale. I think an agency business is substantially easier than running a brand business. And easy is the word that people get upset about, and I understand. Neither are easy. They require a lot of yourself. They're different problems. And so what I mean by easy is the associated risk of failure. An e-commerce business is complex financially and from a capitalization standpoint. It comes with a lot of cash risk, which is really the only way a business can die is if your business account goes to zero and there's no money left. And there's just a much greater risk of that inside of a e-commerce business because of inventory and the complexities therein, right? And
we're seeing that right now. We're seeing
totally.
We're seeing like headwinds and supply chain issues and Facebook issues, and this is one of the first times when we felt headwinds in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a lived reality that I think people have experienced in lots of different phases at different times. I've watched it happen, play out. As you try and move into retail, there's often a lot of complexities around cash flow management because of the way the payment term works. Like there's all these spaces in which there's this really big risk from a cash standpoint with e-commerce. And it is just a grind. It's hyper competitive. And on the service side of the business, the thing about running an agency business is that your costs are more flexible. Now they're more human. So your problems tend to be more people oriented. They're relational problems. They're human problems. And so some people think it's just a matter of which problems would you rather choose. And I understand that for sure. But I think that an agency business is a highly underrated business. People tend to think of it as the multiples aren't good. The upside isn't great. And I don't think that's true at all. I think oftentimes, e-commerce businesses are actually over-romanticized in terms of their potential upside and exit potential relative to a service business. And so I try and just encourage the agency owners out there, because a lot of times we can get caught in this idea that we need to transition over to running a brand to have a real meaningful business opportunity. And I just don't believe that. I can tell you I've lived it, is that building an agency business has real financial potential to be a really great asset for you and your employees and everybody else.
Yeah. Now, but I think that this part of the natural grass is greener side, whether you are in a brand,
totally,
or you're in an agency, or you may in both of those, you might be looking at software, right? And you're like,
totally.
Okay, this is going to be a better business. I got to switch it. But every business has challenges and it has unique skills that it requires you to have and develop, and they're all.
And that's exactly right. So the skills thing is another thing that I like. As an agency owners, we can deceive ourselves into thinking the thing that we are doing in the marketing service is what's growing the business. Yeah. And I just know that like in operating brands, I would say that 85% of our mental energy is applied to cash management, supply chain, product, and 15% of it is into growth marketing. Not that that's not a critical component, of course it is, but having an agency of marketers does not actually equip you to launch physical products. They're not the same overlap of org structure, capitalization, or any of those things. And sometimes like you just don't know what's on the other side of the fence until you step over it and interact with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that also puts so much into perspective around the product, right? The product is going to be 80 to 90% of the success of the business is whether or not people actually want the product. Is it quality? There's a saying, I remember we were about a house. We're looking at houses with this realtor in Texas, and we walk into one house and she's like, "Oh, we got to leave right now." She's like, "They just put lipstick on a pig." Oh. And I think a little bit about that when people are like, if they over market a product that's not very good.
That's right.
Right. You can do that in today's day and age, but at the end of the day, people aren't going to come back, and they're not going to build a community around your product or a passion for it or tell other people. And that's just so powerful. I read some tweet from, I can't remember who it was. It was talking about word of mouth 2.0. It was like word of mouth switches. It's like word of mouth is incredibly powerful, but now it's like, are they sharing your product in WhatsApp, in iMessage, all those things? And they won't if the product sucks.
That's exactly right. And we talk about that all the time. It's like, as an agency, you get a great perspective to this, right? Because I can have the same group of people, same talent, same intellect, same creative capacity, working on 5 different brands and producing 5 different outcomes. Yeah. Well, how is that possible? Well, it's because the reality is that there's an inherent set of attributes related to the product that are disassociated from just pure marketing effectiveness, right? So the product does, at the end of the day, matter so much, and the work that the brand does to surround itself with sort of there's something beyond even just the physical attributes of the product too, that are the sort of like intangible ethos, and this is where sort of people use the phrase brand around what the product is, who it's for, and what it's intended to represent from an identity standpoint that are just critical components to success.
So you're one of the best people to talk about this then. Let's talk about Facebook.
Yep.
What the hell is going on over there? How is this impacting you, your guys' agency, and how is it impacting your clients?
Yeah. So in Q3 of 2021, I think will be sort of case study in the most complex time in digital marketing for sure in my career, right? And part of it was, I would actually say that Facebook is sort of a monster of its own creation in that this problem was manifest on the basis of how dependent and effective the tool had been for all of us. We had this single source of truth in ROAS that had been at least a great proxy towards driving revenue for the business in ways that people could trust and make decisions around. We can spare the debate around attribution, and we can all just agree that at the very least it was a useful metric in decision making that most people had oriented a lot of their behavior around. Right.
Especially for anybody who had a majority of their advertising spend from Facebook. If that was if you were spending 60 to 80%, it was the truth.
That's right. That's right. And whether again, you 1 day click, 7 day click, 20, it doesn't matter. Whatever you were using, you had some metric that was driving business decisions for you that suddenly overnight, really like May 1st or whatever the target date of impact that you would sort of identify, that's the sort of moment we saw the API data start changing on Facebook. Like from that day forward, you went from incredible data integrity to total confusion, right? And so in that moment, what occurred really was in the absence of good information, what people did, and it's understandable, was they pulled back because it appeared overnight that your Facebook attribution had reduced by 30 to 50% in most cases. And so the natural response was ROAS down, spend follows, right? And so everyone pulled back. So if you look at June and July and our spend trends, it's like, brr. And then everyone is attempting to sort out, okay, what is actually occurring? And that's been the exercise of the last 90 days is, okay, now let's look at this comparatively across Google last click, which is sort of constant if you've been good with UTMs. Let's look at what we call acquisition MER, or new customer revenue over ad spend. Let's look at overall revenue. Let's look at, as many different signals as we can. People are layering in first party data to now begin to sort of answer the important question, which is this actual optimization reduction or is this just signal loss and attribution loss? And so we found that there's no one answer to this question. There's nothing dogmatic to say it is definitively this in every case. I will say that more often than not, we have found that businesses were not experiencing as much efficiency reduction as it was perceived. And so what we've seen now is clarity of decision making, layers of additional information, and been able to now begin to recalibrate around what is success, how do we define it, and how do we make decisions correspondingly. And we're beginning to see it sort of pick back up. But it's been a long, tedious process of sorting through a lot of information.
So as you sort through this, right, and you say one of the things you mentioned was it's not as much of a loss in efficiency. Yeah. Is there any way to quantify that? Or what do you see? Because a lot of times people are sitting there in a vacuum, right? They've got their own business and they're trying to sort it out. And they're like, and they're looking around for other brands and trying to see, has anybody else gone through this and seen what model they can use?
Yes.
Have you quantified it in any way? Is there any tips you can give to other people?
So here, my first challenge to everyone is that our deep desire is to not seek truth, it's to seek commiseration. And what I mean by that is when you are experiencing something, you begin to look for people experiencing the same thing. And you seek comfort in the shared experience of suffering or success, right? In both cases. And so my caution to everybody as you consider this problem is to know how narrow your individual data set is and to try and seek as wide a view as possible into what's occurring. So I can't tell you definitively across all of Facebook or all of e-commerce. I can speak to our data set, right? That's what I can share with you. I can share across 230 stores, about $2 billion in revenue, about $350, $400 million in annual spend. Like that's what I have inside of Statless, our data platform. And I can tell you that since the launch of iOS, the primary metric that we care about at the end of the day really is new customer acquisition efficiency. So what we would call AMER, or overall business revenue, MER, total sales over total ad spend. And we're tracking those two things as the primary indices of, are we effectively acquiring new customers? Are we generating the net profitability that we want on aggregate? And neither of those metrics have declined at all on aggregate. Now, are there businesses that are experiencing decline? Yes. And I would even say that smaller stores are being disproportionately affected by their signal loss because their ability to optimize in a machine learning tool that's dependent on inputs is more dramatically affected if you lost 15% of Facebook reported conversions that they're optimizing for. So we are seeing
and
more
if
of
you're already
that.
small, right? You're already small. You don't have that many.
That's right. And so I empathize with that. That is very real, and it makes the process very hard to utilize the tool. But for brands that have a meaningful volume of conversion, their ability to sort out attribution beyond what Facebook ROAS is happening and use that to apply to make decisions, we are still seeing people now, especially last 30, 45 days, produce really strong outcomes and continue to experience growth. Now, what I'll say that collectively has happened, and so a few numbers. Facebook has reported 15% attribution loss. That's their defined metric. We see it as closer to 30% reported attribution loss collectively since May 1st. Okay. Now, again, AMER, we actually have up, and Google last click ROAS, we have flat. So up about 8% on AMER, flat on GA last click ROAS. And why is GA?
For people who are listening who don't know what AMER is,
Yep.
what is
Acquisition Marketing Efficiency Rating, right? So it's just new customer revenue over ad spend. And the reason we use that as a proxy is because most of our advertising in Facebook is focused on new customer acquisition, and Facebook in most cases is the primary channel of new customer acquisition. Now, what we do with each of these brands, we have a report inside of our data tool that we call the iOS Impact Report. Now, what it allows us to do is choose an impact date and compare performance across 4 metrics. Facebook reported ROAS, and we can alter that between 28-day, 7-day, 1-day view. Click, so we can alter that. GA last click ROAS. Now, why is GA last click ROAS important? Well, because it's unaffected by iOS, right? So in order to determine the viability of that metric for your business, though, what you first must do is go back and look historically to see if there's a corollary relationship between Facebook ROAS and GA last click ROAS. And the only place that we see that exist is in 1-day click, no view, 1-day click, and GA last click. And so as often as possible, we're trying to find metrics that have a relationship between each other that we can use to understand how one might have been affected when one wasn't. So we'll check those two, and then we have MER and AMER. And so we'll go and look at the historical relationship between all of these metrics to determine which one in each individual brand is the most effective tool to substitute or supplement Facebook with, right? And so then we'll use that and determine the delta. So let's say GA last click is flat, and Google Facebook's down 15%, we're then going to sort of offset our Facebook targets by that 15%. We're going to change our bid caps, we're going to change our ROAS targets, and we're going to assume a signal loss in that area. And that's helping us then to get back on the wheels and give our media buyers, who ultimately still need a target in the account to set up their campaigns to make decisions, and been able to optimize against it.
Well, that's really interesting. And that's also connected, basically pretty similar. I was reading some thread on the earnings call, Facebook, and they were discussing that there was 2 things they're missing, right? Measurement and targeting. And I think it was Sheryl Sandberg was talking about how they expect to fix measurement over the next however many months. That's one of the things that they're working on, and they're going to be able to figure that out. And that will probably over time seem like bring back that gap, the signal loss that you guys are seeing.
Yep.
But back to your point about commiserating or looking for success and celebrating together, I think it's interesting because that was happening before this rolled out as well,
of course.
Right?
Yep.
People were like capitulating before it even happened, and at the end of the day, like consumer goods are continuing to be sold, the demand is continuing to go up, and it's one of the things that I think is going to continue to grow, and it's still a great time to be a business owner. One of the things I saw one of your tweets from, was September, you talked about this. Too many DTC brands still assume advertising means Facebook and Instagram newsfeed ads. The game has changed. Now it's also Google Shopping, Instagram Stories, Instagram Reels, TikTok, Snapchat, YouTube, pre-roll. I could go on. What?
Yeah.
I think is a great tweet. Got a lot of feedback on Twitter. What are you guys doing? What are you seeing as kind of the next place that if people are hit or are feeling the struggle right now, where are you having success as you branch out?
There's a tension in this. Okay. The tension is that diversification is a buzzword that people want for what they believe it represents in terms of de-risking their advertising media mix, which I think we could all agree the best case scenario is that I have 10 different advertising channels that all are producing volume and scale efficiently to produce profitability, that would be amazing. We would all, if we could choose between one channel or 15 products,
there's no
right?
question.
Right, of course. But the tension is that diversification is not, and this is actually, I think, in some ways a good setup to this conversation around NFTs. Diversification is not primarily an advertising strategy. Okay, what do I mean by that? Right now, the reality is that every dollar out of Facebook for most brands is an opportunity cost for overall efficiency of media dollars. Meaning, you should not anticipate that you can move dollars out of Facebook to TikTok or Snapchat or YouTube and outperform on a direct response efficiency basis Facebook. That is what people think sometimes when they think diversification. I'll just go somewhere else and get comparable or better returns. And that's almost never the case. Facebook, I think we're all going to now look back and appreciate just how freaking incredible this product is in terms of an advertising product. And maybe, I'm sure people do, but the amount of like hate that I see for this platform is like mind-boggling to me in so many ways. It is the greatest advertising product ever built by like orders of magnitude better than anything that's ever existed. And in some ways, we've been spoiled by that fact. And so when I put that tweet out, Austin, what I want people to begin to understand is that I believe that diversification is valuable for your business, and you should pursue it, and you should understand how to win in those channels. But what it requires is that you can win at a lower efficiency, which has to do with the lifetime value of the customer, your ability to convert traffic from other sources with great landing pages and all sorts of things. Like, there's a mechanism to distribution that isn't about take your Facebook ads and put them on TikTok, set up a campaign in there and turn it on. That will not likely produce for you the thing that you're actually after.
For sure. And even at even lower efficiency than a successful campaign on one of these other channels. There's also a hidden risk that people don't think about, which is execution risk. When you're trying to execute on 3 or 4 different platforms with a small team, it makes it more challenging to have success on any of them.
So that's that is a hugely underrated point too. Is that like this is how Facebook really started. It was right, like we took our TV ads and we sort of redistributed them onto platform. Then everyone sort of realized, well, that's not the language of that medium. And now sort of the disease is, well, take your Facebook ads and put them on TikTok or Snapchat or anywhere else. Yeah. And so what you're talking about is like to actually be effective in these arenas is to meet people in the medium in the language that they're doing, which requires a creative development process and a sequence and a consideration and testing all its own, which often is done then with like this sort of like excess sparse little portion of budget, as if this is going to somehow unlock this diversification mechanism that we want with just like take 2% of my Facebook budget, move it over here and get me better results. And it's like, well, it's so hard as a team to allocate the appropriate resources necessary to go and learn and explore. So there's a lot there. The one area that I would say is, to me, if you're going to move out of Facebook, the 1B in my mind is Google, is search. And this is obviously product dependent.
For sure.
But I would specifically say that in non-branded categorical search and shopping, there are lots of opportunities for people to begin to build longer tail sets of keywords, go deeper in those areas than they have maybe historically, because it takes a little bit more time and it's a bunch of tiny bits of volume. It's stacking crumbs, if you will. But there's real opportunity, and we've seen that be the secondary place where we can sort of subsidize any Facebook decline with some of that, some more intense search efforts.
That's great. I always think about this concept of like raising the floor as well. And I feel like Google Shopping and Google Advertising are a great way, especially when times are good or really when they're bad. But it's like it can raise your floor so you don't go back if algorithm changes in the future. Yeah,
I love that metaphor. And it's great because, it doesn't represent huge upside because it's a perfect marketplace and all the profits eventually get competed away because it's a bid-based ecosystem. But it does have a great way of sort of establishing for yourself a baseline of volume that you can sort of bank on and count on fairly repeatedly.
It's interesting. Well, I want to transition a little bit because one of the reasons I want to have you on was to talk about the Metaverse. You've been tweeting a lot about NFTs, and you've been tweeting a lot about Web3, but I just want to start out with why is this so exciting to you? Why is it something that you've put a lot of time and energy into researching?
It's because of everything we just talked about. And what I mean by that is there is what the massive underlying problem in e-commerce, as I experience it in my own brands and all my clients, is what I call margin pressure. And that's just a fancy way of saying like profits are being reduced. And they're being reduced and attacked by a bunch of vectors, right? Right now, people are experiencing it on the cost of their supply chain. So the actual cost of production of goods and materials is going up, right? So to get your product in from China is now more expensive than it was before. That's margin pressure. Rising CAC is margin pressure. And then the other big one is labor. Like in our e-commerce industry, I'm sure you're hiring, it is massive labor margin pressure. So if you take the three core components of, like, we have this principle we call 4-quarter accounting, right? It's this idea that your revenue is broken up into four primary categories: profit, OPEX, or your general administrative people payroll, cost of goods, and CAC. And each of those areas right now are under pressure to reduce profit. It is harder than ever before to produce profit. So in that situation, what I'm always considering is, how will businesses succeed in the future? Because the beautiful thing about capitalism is that margin innovation is a massive component of what happens. Is these businesses have huge incentives to figure out and solve this problem. So that's where innovation occurs. And so what's happening in my mind is like, okay, where does margin innovation come from? How are we going to create profits in the future as a e-commerce and business providers? And that's the thing I'm thinking about all the time. So we think about this on the labor side. We think about this in every different arena. And so a few of the big areas that I believe are going to be a part of that are digital goods and software. So if you think about businesses like 8 Sleep, or Aura Ring, or Peloton, part of the reason they've been able to scale so fast is because they can offset customer acquisition costs on first order with recurring software revenue. That creates a layer of additional customer value that that allows you to offset rising CAC, right? Because those customers become worth a lot to you over time. Digital goods, you know what is better margin than your production pressure? Making digital objects that have 100% margin, right? Like, so when I think about the metaverse, there's two things that it really unlocks. Is that every brand, one of the things that's really, so there's two things. There's volume upside in the metaverse. Right now, my closet and my drawers have a limitation on the amount of t-shirts that I can own. As we think about how we as a society grow the overall consumption, the overall GDP of production, well, part of it is I'm going to own 100 times the amount of digital apparel than I will physical. Right? And I really believe that. It's going to be to outfit all of my, avatars in the metaverse, whether that's in games, in sort of environments, all those things. So now brands have a role to play to sell digital objects that have 100% margin, no supply chain pressure, and lots of opportunity for additional revenue. And you watch this, you can go read Nike's patent filings for crypto kicks that they filed in March of 2020, years before this, was all occurring. And you can see it. You can know that these people are planning for this. You can watch what was it Gucci just did with their most recent apparel launch, and you can watch this come to life and realize that like identity, which objects like apparel have a critical role in playing in the future. Our digital identity for many of us is more important to us than our physical one even. And that's odd maybe for us. I don't know how old you are, Austin. I'm 37. But like I'm on the teetering on the edge of that being a reality for me. But my kids,
I'm almost 35.
Yeah, okay. So my kids, I have two twin boys that are 7. If I said, here's $50, what do you want with it? The idea that they would use that money to buy a t-shirt is like 4,000th down on the list, and the first 49,000 things are pieces for their Roblox character. Outfitting their Roblox avatar is more important to them than outfitting their physical identity. Right. And so this is where brands need to begin to realize that this is digital identity and the curation of digital objects. If you think about this, like our Zoom background, like you look like you've stacked some books back there intentionally in a way that communicates something about you. My poster of Kobe Bryant and pictures of my kids are intentional digital representations. My avatar on Twitter, all of these things are spaces where I am stating something about myself in a digital space. And that's the beginning. That gives you the bridge into thinking about how this is going to be in effect.
Well, I think all you have to think about is time spent, right? Start thinking about the amount of time that you're spending interacting in the real world versus interacting in, we can call it the metaverse, online, whatever. Yeah. And you start to realize, well, okay, it actually makes sense why you would invest in your perception in the digital world rather than the in-person world.
That's
and
right. That's exactly
that'll
right.
continue to grow in that direction. I mean, I think,
and these things are merging. Like, you're so right. Like, the amount of time spent, and the Zoom and remote work has been a huge piece of accelerating this. But if you think about like the layer of digital on top of your physical world, think about Alexa. Think about the interaction of the digital interfaces in your car. Think about, like, obviously your phone is big, but the digital layer that's being built onto the physical, these things are going to become much more blurred than we can even fathom at this point, right? And so the separation, right now we move from a physical universe into a 2D digital one, and then just the next evolution is a much more immersive experience than that. Whether that's AR as a bridge into VR or it jumps straight to it is sort of to be determined. But you just have to follow, too, the signals. Like, Facebook, we're sitting here talking about Facebook, and Facebook, the thing about Facebook that people don't recognize is they very clearly breadcrumb you exactly what they're doing. Hey everyone, we're going to give you this little checkbox for digital interest targeting expansion. Hey, it's just there if you want to click it. It's default off. It's default on now. And then, and now it's just the default. You can't even change it, right? Because we're actually going to move to this AI-based optimization. Hey, everybody, the Metaverse, this is really important. Mark Zuckerberg is going to talk to you this. We're going to acquire Oculus. We're going to spend $2 billion on this. Oh, and now we're changing our name. Like, we're going to make this really clear to you where this is all going. And so it's not at this point an outlandish claim to presume that this is the direction that brands are going to have to be able to figure out how to engage in.
For sure, yeah. It's really interesting to kind of start exploring and dive into, because I think you're right from the perspective of, like, you having younger kids gives you a perspective that people who are, say, 35 and older don't have.
Yeah.
Right? It's realizing, like, where we're going and trying to skate to where the puck is going rather than chase the trends that are right here.
Yep.
What do you have to say? So what do you have to say to the people, though, that look at this and they're like, oh, this just feels like a whole big Ponzi scheme. Like, people are buying, apes and then flipping them. And, I have a friend who flipped an NFT for $100K in a day. Right.
Yeah.
And
it's happening.
That's crazy. But what do you say to the people who think this is just like a one big Ponzi scheme and someone's going to be left holding the bag?
Well, so I think that, and this is like a very, very like Twitter comment response, but like anybody who speaks in those kind of broad definitions of an entire category of technology, I think is probably missing a lot of what's actually happening. I would say that there are Ponzi schemes occurring, and there will be people left holding the bag, and there's massive innovation that's going to transform the world. Like, I think all of that is true, and to paint any of it with a broad brush likely just means you haven't explored it in depth. So, like, I can give you a lot of examples that are very cool, practical applications of NFTs and where people are actually benefiting from real objects, access, utility, all these different things that I would just say, like, that has nothing to do with like buying and selling and flipping. Now, there's definitely a mechanic of that is a part of this culture that I think is actually a really important one, that is about transfer of ownership and assets to people in a way that is like disorienting for people that they're not used to engaging. But I think that's a little bit of the like cultural wiring about how we've like sort of been taught that like you can buy lottery tickets, but you can't invest in startups. Like, there are weird cultural dynamics about wealth. Insane. Right, like of wealth preservation and inequality that, in my opinion, I don't want to get too political on this here, is totally bonkers in our society that this is sort of intended to disrupt.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I think there's other forces as well pushing this push towards more of an anonymous online profile or this avatar. I think a lot of it comes down to with rise of like authoritarianism, censorship, these types of things. When you look at the desire that's going to be built to pull in some of these profits that have been created from cryptocurrencies, there's going to be people that don't want their actual face out there. And when you create this anonymous profile, then there's even more incentive to equip yourself or purchase things that again, at the end of the day, like, what do people buy stuff for? It's usually like status, to make them feel good, to make other people look at them as smarter, wealthier, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting take. What are some of the projects you're most excited about? You mentioned some of these things that you feel like are providing a lot of value.
Well, so yeah, so I want to give and God, I wish I could sit on the identity piece because I think it's so fascinating. It's such a huge component of this, but I do want to get to some practical examples, but we might have to revisit that at some point. But I want to give a few ways in which NFTs in particular, which I think is, the core, maybe sort of the most hyped in this moment, directly affect our world. And when I say our world, I mean like consumer product e-com in some very cool examples that people can check out, they can go and play with and experience that I think will start to get the wheels turning of like, oh, okay, I see how this is going to transform some of the mechanisms of what I'm talking about. So I'm gonna go through three of my favorite. So one is, and this happened is a company called Artifact. Okay, so RTFKT. Okay, and I want to reference a drop that they did with an artist called Ferocious. Okay, and this is it was a sneaker release. Okay, so the way they did it is they created 3 tiers of NFTs. Like think of it as basic, premium, plus, like high end, legend, whatever the language was exactly. I don't remember. One was like $1,000, one was $1,500, one was $2,000. Okay, and they launch it. What's up?
So that was a floor price.
That was like it was a limited edition drop. There was like 500 of one, 250 of the other, whatever the exact numbers were. They were all scarce. The more expensive ones were scarcer. Some fixed limited edition drop. Okay. And the initial purchase was an NFT. So you bought an NFT of the sneaker, and then 30 days after the drop, the holders of the NFT were then able to trade those in for a physical pair. Okay? So here's what I want you to understand about the mechanics of this and why it's so brilliant for e-com. One of the biggest issues for a brand that we talked about earlier, margin pressure, is the cash conversion cycle. Okay. So one of the hardest things about managing your cash in e-com is that you don't get your money for the product till you've paid for it, till you've produced it, shipped it, received it, and sold it. And then, so you are floating cash out of pocket for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
So for a while, there was this thing called Kickstarter that everyone stood in the gap of. We just did a big Kickstarter launch for Modern Fuel. It's an important way of sort of like inverting that, bring cash forward to production, right? That everyone was like, oh my God, this is brilliant, so amazing. Well, let me tell you why NFTs represent an even better version of this, right? So in this drop for Ferocious, the day it happens, the artist has a big following, they sell out, instantly generate, I think, a few $1 million in cash, okay? Now the holders of that NFT, they don't have a promise for a product someday. That's not what they have. They have an asset. That asset can actually trade on the secondary market on OpenSea. And so the price of the NFTs actually increased from the time of the drop to the secondary market. So if I was like, well, hey, I don't actually want my cash as the owner of this NFT, I need it for whatever life event or thing that occurs, I actually have liquid access to get out of the shoe purchase in a way that doesn't hurt the brand because the purchase is still committed, but there's a secondary market that trades on. It's an asset to me. I now have something of value. And in addition to that, the brand receives a percentage of that secondary transaction as well, programmed in the smart contract. So now there's residual recurring revenue after the initial sale. And then everyone who on that snapshot day, whoever the holders are, actually got the shoes. Okay?
And one other aspect of that that's interesting is that all the people who have the NFTs are incentivized to promote the product because they want the value of their NFT and the shoes to go up.
The built-in affiliates. Right? Like built-in marketers for your product in a way that they are financially incentivized by, right? This is another thing. A lot of times we have these asks of our customers that candidly only benefit us.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
When you want to go out and tell, hey, share this with a friend, give me your email, and here's a $5 off coupon. Like we come up with these ways to try and create an exchange while actually holding all the value for ourselves. That's really what we're trying to do if we're honest, right? But this sort of, again, it's sort of moving the actual monetary asset value into more hands of more people. And so I think that's like a really cool example. And Artifact, like if you go look what they're doing all sorts of rad stuff. They are at the very cutting edge of this idea of digital physical goods. And I would definitely go follow them. RTFKT. They're doing a punks project lines between selling just digital goods and sneakers to physical ones and bringing those to life. Super, super cool to follow. Okay. So that's fascinating. The second one I want to look at is what the Hundreds have done with Atom Bomb Squad. Okay. So the Hundreds is a streetwear brand, been around for something like 25 years. Bobby Hundreds is their founder. Really awesome community and brand. So again, in this, Yeah, I don't know if it's his actual like on his birth certificate,
name,
but it's
his real name.
That's what he goes by. Yeah. So they released an NFT collection that they called the Atom Bomb Squad. Okay, so if you Google Atom Bomb Squad, you can go to the website and check this out. Okay, and this is a perfect example of the community power and utility of having NFTs for your brand. Okay, so they launched 25,000 of these, and I think they sold them for between like 0.05 and 0.15 ETH. So let's just say it was 25,000 of them at 0.1 ETH. I have a tweet about the exact numbers here. I don't know if I'm saying it exactly right. But let's say that's 2,500 ETH that they generated at ETH's current price. That's a $10 million drop of pure cash margin that the business generated for themselves. Okay. Now, so they sell these 25,000 NFTs. They sell out in whatever it was, 2 days, somewhere between. And what they did was they were what's in the NFT space called a mint pass, which was basically you buy it and then 2 days later the art is revealed. So you don't know yet whether you're going to get a super rare one or a not so rare one. And what they did is they took all of their historical patterns that they made their apparel out of. So styles that each one had a story. Here's this cherry print that we used in a collection in the 1990s. Here's this pattern. And they have this rich history and story associated with their logo, the little cherry bomb man, and then the background pattern. And then they got some really rad street artists to do a bunch of one-of-ones that were in there that you might be able to land, right? And so people revealed the art. And then alongside the NFT, along with it, you got access to certain things. So everybody got a shirt. Everybody gets pre-release of every big sale that they have. Live events you get access to. So the NFT is a token. It's a community access token as well as an asset. And again, I was looking this morning on the secondary market, so OpenSea, where most of the transactions are now, there's been $10,700 in secondary market trades of these atom bombs. Okay, so and right now the residual is 5%. So that's another 535 ETH.
When you say residual, that's generated. The amount that goes back to the company
to the creator.
A secondary market transaction is made.
That's right. So this is one of the big elements of NFTs is like right now the secondary market for a lot of brands, it's humongous. There's like giant apparel secondary stores that the original brands make $0 on.
Yeah.
Okay. That is a massive untapped market for all of these brands that they're going, wait a second, I don't want to allow, all these secondary marketplaces selling my goods and I make none of the money. But this now they make a residual on that. So that's an additional $2 million. So a consumer product brand selling apparel, probably at 60% margin, in the last 45 days, put $12 million on their balance sheet in pure cash.
It's huge. That's huge. It's a fundamental rethinking of their business model and a whole.
There's no other way to do that. There's no way to do that,
yeah.
Right? Think about how much production and effort goes into selling $12 million worth of merchandise. Like the amount of people and labor and supply chain and shipping and fulfillment and storing and warehousing and merchandising and to sell $12 million worth of merchandise.
Yeah.
Right? Well, and so you look at this again, margin pressure, it completely transforms their business.
And you mentioned Kickstarter, right? And Kickstarter has been an incredible tool. One of the downsides of Kickstarter, though, is it still relies on fans. And the interesting thing about NFTs is that it switches people into owners, right? And that's at the end of the day with Kickstarter, what can you do? Like often people reward their fans with things, but they're still not incentivized with the end success of the company. It's just them being fans and having things thrown their way, which obviously has been powerful. Kickstarter is one of the most revolutionary things that came to online business over the last 10 years.
It's massive, right? And I've watched businesses like Taylor Stitch. I don't know if you know those guys, the apparel company. They do a great job of doing like a workshop model where they built their own sort of Kickstarter pre-order mechanism. And a lot of brands have gotten into this because everyone's solving for the same problem. Their cash conversion cycle is hard. Managing cash in e-commerce is really freaking hard, right? So Atom Bomb Squad is an example of community. So now what they can do with these token holders forever, okay, is they can continue to add value associated with holding them. You get that we're having this party. We've got this new apparel line. We've got this secret sale. We've got whatever. Forever, they can add value to being a holder of that of that asset to just keep the continued engagement and trading and connection to it. So now the brand has this like built-in, like you said, army of people that have a vested interest in seeing the business succeed, right? And seeing the value of their asset go up. So now you've turned people into like, yeah, I wear the hundreds every now and again, to like, no, I have a financial incentive in the success of the hundreds. Like it's just the depth of connection for people. And you go, look, they're already holding these parties of people. And it's just like the connection that they have to the thing just deepens, right? Like it begins to move to a different level.
My friend Zach Oberon has this great tweet about the conversion from Web 2 to Web 3. He's like, in Web 2, having great taste means that you spend a lot of money. In Web 3, having great taste means you earn a lot of money.
That's fascinating.
And that's like a very interesting way to think about, right? Like you've got all these tastemakers who might be able to get into projects early and then watch the proceeds, watch the value of this skyrocket of these individual people. I think it's also back to what you said earlier about Facebook having the algorithm update and issues with tracking primarily impacting smaller brands. I think what's interesting about some of the stuff you're talking about with NFTs is this actually may allow a lot of these smaller brands to actually have more success than the larger brands, because it allows you to create, well, one, innovating quicker, but also it seems inherent that like scarcity is important. And so when you're looking at smaller brands, there's inherent scarcity there. Like, I don't know how much, there may be some value in there's going to be tons of value in Nike doing it. But at the end of the day, like, it's kind of cooler that smaller brands have this opportunity to create even more scarcity and have success with this.
So, yeah, I don't know. So I think the actual problem here is going to be that I don't know that smaller brands many of them are going to be able to afford to attempt to step into this world before it's too late. And so like, if you think about this, go back to Nike filing a patent 18 months ago with a research department that's focused on making this work. And I'm sitting here with 200 clients going like, we're trying to decide if we launch like a big NFT initiative inside of CTC. And the calculus I'm going is like, who has dollars in the next 12 months that they're going to allocate to this?
Yeah.
Like that, like dollars that they're like, hey, we're just going to spend this not on Facebook ads, not on trying to drive our core business, not like on trying to figure it out. And what's happening is a few of them realize that like they're going to do that or they're going to die. And so they're going to have to take a different shot because it's just not working. But I don't know. I think it's a controversial area where it's sort of like, I think what happens in these major transitions of Web 1 to Web 2 and Web 2 to Web 3 is like, there's people that said like, yeah, we'll go mobile. And then there's people that were like, no, mobile is not going to be a thing. And it's going to be very difficult in some cases, I think, for people to see it. And so I just don't know. I don't know if the smaller brands are going to have an advantage because unfortunately this moment is like their cash is precious. And so it's going to be hard in a lot of cases, at least in my conversations, for them to justify like taking some shot like this, you know?
Maybe, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Maybe it's going to be more just the people that are able to do it are more of like, I mean, I think it's partnerships, right? It's creator partnerships that allow them to be able to have success with that. It's like, all right, the brand, you've got people out there that are incredible. I mean, again, some of the stuff you're talking about was partnerships with artists, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Interesting.
And what happens in these things, like, so what's beautiful about the e-commerce ecosystem is that like the reality is that so much of the entrepreneurship is built off the back of the innovation of the tools that support the system. So like a couple of things that are going to make it, because right now the reality is if you wanted to launch an NFT collection like Atom Bomb Squad, like just the gas, which is the fee to pay to create a transaction on the blockchain on Ethereum, like can be upwards of over $100 a transaction. So if you were trying to run $10,000 or in their case $25,000, they paid a hefty fee to do that. You need a lot of money. But there are places like so we're working right now with a company called Gig Labs, who's working on a Shopify beta for helping brands launch NFTs like a SKU. Yeah. And the way that it basically works is it's all built on Flow, which is an alternate blockchain to Ethereum. And part of that's because of the transaction fees. Like we don't need to go into the whole ETH2, the sort of layer 2 scaling problems with Ethereum. But Flow is another alternative blockchain that Dapper Labs built, which is the company that built Top Shot. And so Shopify is working with them to allow brands to basically upload a JPEG in the back end of your store, launch it like a SKU, and publish it with associated benefits, like super simply. And there's about 100 stores that are playing with that right now, and we've gone through it, and it's pretty cool. Like it's early days of what will be a Shopify app that you can get in the App Store, and that will help the bridge for people. Because right now, like most people are like, I don't even know where I'd begin to go create an NFT collection. So that'll help.
You have to be you have to be really, really deep into it to be even get involved.
Yeah, right to now. Even to conceptualize it. Yeah. So like that kind of innovation will help. There's really cool sites. Like one of my favorites is there's a site called mintgate.io. Okay. So this is a simple way to basically think about it as access gate content or product with checking for ownership of an NFT. Right. So right now, NFTs are held in wallets, like so Ethereum wallets, like MetaMask is the largest one, which all have like Chrome browser extensions. That's primarily how people will use them, or their in-app browser, on mobile. And so what Mintgate does is it allows you to connect your wallet, check for ownership of a specific NFT, and then provide access to the content. So like I was talking with Jack Buchter, and he does, a lot of this art stuff, and he wants to create a community that gets access to certain teaching or information. Or I think about this for admission or your community, Austin. Yeah. Like imagine you wanted to provide like a special webinar or special content, and you wanted people to access it. So Mintgate is an easy technological solution for you to sell an NFT, have people confirm that they have it, and then give them access to that content. So think about this for a Black Friday special sale for a brand. You're like, hey, we've got 20% off here, but all our holders get 30% off here. And it's behind this access gated portion of the website. And that's like all the sort of different layers, and all those little tools are going to empower making this simpler. And that stuff will get built really, really fast because there's going to eventually be such demand for it.
I feel like we're just so early. I think back to, I mean, a good example in my mind is like pets.com versus Chewy, right? So there was like 2000 pets.com, 2001 crash, but they had the idea, right? The idea was correct, and it was inevitable that there was going to be a company like Chewy coming. And I think that's kind of where we are. Listen, it feels like in the sense that a lot of this stuff is really hard, like the functional aspect of it is really challenging, but the like philosophical ideas and the way that it's moving, actually, the more time you spend in it, the more it clicks and the more obvious it is.
And this is exactly the debate for me, is like when does this matter to enough people to make it actionable for people like you or I running a service business? And one of the things I'm thinking that's different though than the Chewy Pets example, because I think that's a classic one. The other classic one is sort of people thinking about moving to mobile apps, where that became a big thing that everybody had to have a mobile app, right? At one point.
Now nobody has mobile apps for a store.
Right, exactly. Then we just thought that was a terrible idea. So I think the question though that's different today is that what you're describing with Chewy versus Pets was like, what was being developed was the internet at that point, right? Like that was like the proliferation of the internet. Right now, the rails of information distribution globally are so much more developed that the rate of information transfer in this moment, the ability for us to get on and do this, for people to learn, there are already 10,000 blogs published about what NFTs are and how many podcasts have sprung up about it. And the amount of information and how fast it gets created and how quickly and broadly it can be distributed versus what occurred at the 1999 at the Pets Chewy, and how information, it was still newspapers and it was still that era. I just think this might happen faster than previously because of that. And when people see the monetization of these things, it's like incredibly powerful.
I 100% agree with the speed aspect of it. I think it's going to move really, really fast. I think the example was more around like that it does feel inevitable, and we're not sure. To me, at least, I don't know how long it's going to take. But I see your point about the speed and the ability to innovate is much faster. I mean, we're in this time. I also think it can feel like it's moving faster than it is when you're on Twitter, right? Surrounded in this like small little niche. And that's where it's interesting to me, is like what is reality versus perception? And again,
well, I think so that is an important question. So I'd be curious, like, how do you answer it? right? Because I think it's the most important question. So I think about, like, I'm thinking about this all the time in terms of signals of, like, again, we have this, so Orchid Bertelson, who's our COO at CTC, she has this thing that she and I work through all the time, because I'm a futurist. I'm always living out there. And so I'm trying to answer this question. It's like important versus impactful, or interesting versus important. Sorry. Interesting is something that's like cool to learn about and clever, but it's not going to impact your financial of your business in the next 12 months. Right? Important is like, no, this is going to matter. And so this is the question I'm really trying to answer for NFTs. Which is it? Is it interesting or is it important? So I'm trying to look for signals for this all the time, right? So I watch, and so the ones I'm really watching are like, what is the pace at which Facebook's going to move? And like, because the thing I'll say is that I don't see, e-commerce businesses are in real trouble if they don't solve for a lot of these problems in the next 12 months. There is debt compiling up in ways that people are we're not being as transparent about as an industry as we should be, with a lot of these lenders that have brought in a lot of easy access to capital in ways that are going to prove out to be complex. There is a lot of supply chain constraints that are going to like literally destroy margin in ways that are going to lead to really upside down P&Ls for a while. There's stuff. There are LTV models that are not bearing out in the way that people thought and projected against 2 years ago. Right? Like there's a bunch of stuff that if this doesn't get solved, is going to be a real problem for our industry here soon. So I'm looking at what Facebook's doing, how much they're pushing this metaverse narrative. I'm looking at what Shopify does as it relates to how they enable because they're the sort of key underlying architecture for our store owners. And I'm looking at like signals like, okay, Coinbase is launched. They have 2.5 million people on an NFT waiting list. Okay, so right now OpenSea is small, 250,000 users, right? That's nothing. That's absolute nothing burger, right? Like, so what happens as Coinbase, in the same way that they sort of onboard people to crypto, they've been really effective at this. What does that do for users? How does that move things forward? So I'm just trying to get a temperature, but for you, like, how do you think about answering the question? And what signals do you seek out to try and decide when you need to make an action on this?
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, part of the impetus of this podcast was this feeling that I need to explore it more, right? Because it's surrounding me. I'm seeing in my bubble, right? I'm seeing more and more about it. So I'm like, okay, well, I should just use the tools around me to be able to explore this and figure out what it actually means for the future. So the first thing I try to like think about is, what is the reality of the average person's life versus what am I seeing? And try to think about, okay, well, where are we? How far ahead am I in my Twitter bubble versus the average person? And I think that's the part that I usually spend a lot of time thinking about, and ask other people that are, like talking to my parents about it, because, it's interesting to hear what they think about this stuff. And like, it actually helps me explain it a little bit better. And I start to realize, well, when I can explain it better, then that means that, and if they start to get it, then it's like, okay, we're not that far off. Like, they're going to start to understand this. As far as whether it's...
So do you think it has to get all the way to your parents? Like, is that the bridge of relevancy? Because that, like, I think about my mom and I'm like, there are like, I don't know, 2 billion people globally between my, like, sort of the early adopters and my mother. I'm just trying to figure out, like, how far down the customer curve do they need to get here?
I don't think necessarily that. I just think that it's interesting thinking about it from the perspective of a business owner, an e-commerce business owner, like what type of an impact it's going to have. Because it's kind of this like ephemeral, this thing it's like, you're selling physical products, and then this idea that you're going to go and create some limited one-of-one type digital art and sell this to somebody, it's a leap in a certain sense. Where it starts to, I think your comment about like the pressure that people are going to be feeling, margin pressure, is going to lead people to experiment in ways. It might push this forward faster. I don't know. I think it's more
percentage. What would you put? Okay, let's play a game. What percentage of, let's just say, the average Shopify store owner, so let's say sub $10 million. Let's say between $1 million and $10 million. If you took all the stores on Shopify between $1 million and $10 million next year, what percentage of their revenue do they spend on NFT related anything next year?
Next year, I think very, very little.
Okay.
1%.
So you think it's like completely inconsequential next year?
I think so.
So what about 2022? Like what? Like I'm just trying to think. Like what would you say? Because at that point, like, because that is like, to me, if that's true, and I think you're, I don't think that's wrong. I think maybe it might be a little more, but like that's my fear is like, you can't launch a service offering as an agency to a thing that people want to spend no money on.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not a viable business product.
Yeah. Well, I just don't think that it's going to be adopted first by brands. I happen to think that the place we'll see it being adopted in a more rapid fashion is in communities, and that might be the place where people get more comfortable with it before it moves over to like a physical product brand side of things. And that's the big question.
So
that
this is
about. It's like,
okay, so then maybe a better, because this is right. You're right. Okay, so because this is my third example of like thinking about ways that this impact is like, are we actually going to see that the future root of an e-commerce brand actually begins in an NFT community? It actually goes the opposite direction, right?
Yeah.
So I look at so an example of this is Crypto Dads. Okay, so Crypto Dads is an NFT. You can look up the Crypto Dads and the Crypto Moms. Okay, this is an NFT collection that launched, and they're just sort of these like King of the Hill style characters. The art's kind of whatever, but like they tap into sort of perfectly mapping to the audience. It's all like 35-year-old white dudes that are sort of buying NFTs, right? So it's like, this is sort of what they hit their product market fit pretty well early on. But what they've done though now is they raised about $2.5 million in this NFT launch. Okay, so cash. So this is like a fundraising mechanism. Okay, now they have a Discord community of 60,000 people. And now if you go in the Discord, they are launching an energy drink. They're launching a whiskey. They're launching a craft beer. They're launching merchandise, right? And so what you have is an IP and a built-in community for distribution of product that offsets that CAC. So now when you talk about rising CAC, well, we know that email is a big thing that everybody talks about. And what email is distribution to people for free. That's essentially what people mean, right? So whether that's in a Discord or on Klaviyo, the mechanism is still the same. And so one of the things I wonder is if what we're going to see is that the next wave of e-commerce brands that we as advertisers are servicing actually begin out of a lot of these commerce or these like community models that you're sort of describing.
That's what I think the model will look like. Whether it comes from, I think the place where there may, I think the brands that might have success with this are the ones that already have like a big community aspect in what they're doing, and they just launch NFTs to be more involved with the community, kind of like what you're talking about. I feel like it all comes down to that for me, like whether it comes from the bottom up or from splintering off and taking your 1,000 true fans and turning them into 1,000 owners. Like that is the part that is, I think, the most interesting to me, and where I think we'll see it first. It's like it's creating the world's best affiliate and referral program for your best people. That seems to be like that seems to be the step for me, the thing that I'm most excited about. But I don't know. I don't know. I think there's still a lot of hurdles that people need to get through to be able to, around user experience, to make it worthwhile. I mean, I think everything is going more towards individual. So I say this, individuals and communities. And
Yep. Decentralization. That's the sort of theme, right?
Yeah. It's like we have gone down this path of, for so long, it's like, where do we get our news from? Well, it was just like newspapers. And then it got larger and it was like split up: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. And then I feel like the push is going to be even further down these little towards individuals that you follow already. It's like that on Twitter. And then you go into like paid communities, Substacks, and it's like going to be even further down and decentralized out into these different groups. And that's where the excitement of turning those groups into owners is for me, at least.
Totally. Yeah. And that's so good. I think that's a great segue. And I think the sort of like V2 of this conversation then is like DAOs, right? Like, and thinking about how you actually get to these like truly decentralized brands, or even I think a really fun conversation is like the decentralized social networks and what that means for advertising. And like, so like one of the things that I think is fascinating is that there's some people I've had conversations with about sort of like, what is the next, if all social networks are decentralized, right? Like that's really a threat to us as advertisers, is because like Facebook's value is the aggregate access to people, right? So how do you access large audiences if they're all decentralized? That becomes a nightmare. And so there's like sort of these product concepts, which are, imagine a sort of self-serve ecosystem that allowed you to pull up like every Discord community based on topic that was run by moderators, that you could basically submit ad approvals and prices for that they could approve, that the revenue was shared amongst the community. So they sort of self-select into messages from certain providers and offers and opportunities. And so it's like this interface where it's like, here's every interest group, here's your ad concept, you send it to the group, the moderators approve it, the revenue is actually shared amongst the DAO or the group. Like there's these like sort of questions around what is this, like all that kind of stuff, like is super fascinating to sort of dream about. What does this mean for us in attempting to reach people in a sort of segmented, decentralized fashion?
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I definitely would love to have a second conversation. I need to wrap up here, and we'll also be cognizant of your time.
We can do this all day.
My last question for you is, so you're a busy guy. You got lots of businesses to run. You have lots of things going on. You've got kids. How do you maintain your health, relationships, things outside of work while continuing to focus on work and driving the company forward? Is there any things that you've found in the last year that have really helped you out?
Yeah, I mean, I go through this exercise of, it's just a matter of ruthless clarity on aligning your calendar with your values, right? Like, so I have this saying that I sort of live by, which is inner peace is when your calendar is aligned with your values. And so to do that exercise, what it requires is that every so often I wipe my calendar blank and I reconstruct it through first principles of things that matter. So it's like, okay, I try and do it like every couple of months, or if I feel myself in a place where I'm dissatisfied with the allocation of my time, I stop and I'll literally like clear it off and go, okay. And I'm pretty diligent about building what I'll build first is self-care, because if I'm unwell, then I can't care for anybody else. So usually it'll be like, I work out every morning, I've got this time with friends, I've got this date night with my wife, I've got this doctor's appointment, like whatever the first things are, those go on my calendar as immovable objects first. Then it usually, my wife becomes second. What are the needs that I have in my relationship with her? Those go on second. I have this responsibility. I got to take the kids here, whatever. And their time, that becomes the secondary layer of my calendar. Then when I get to work, which is the third thing, it becomes what are the most important tasks that I can do that are, for me as the CEO, my primary responsibilities. And that's the first things that go on there are my job as platform distribution to the all company settings. So all company meetings, board meetings, any time that are primary distribution points where I'm speaking to everybody. Then it's my leaders, my primary leadings with my direct reports. Those go on next. And then what you get to is like the excess space then become the things that maybe you get to, maybe you don't. But the cost of not getting to those things is much lower than not getting to all those things I laid on first. Sure. Right? And so as long as you sort of operate through that with the allocation of your time, dude, does that mean I don't get overwhelmed? Of course not. Are there days where I don't allocate that perfectly? Of course there are. Are my kids right now going, hey dad, we got to go to the trampoline park. Where are you? Yes. And there's things I enjoy more than others and I get drawn into those for sure. But I do my best to try and do that. And I have a wife who's like incredibly gracious and willing to give me feedback, and people around me that are willing to do the same if I'm out of whack in a way that's not serving them. So that's super helpful too.
Taylor, awesome, man. I'll let you get to the trampoline park. If somebody wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do it? Is it Twitter? Follow, like they want to learn more about what you're doing. Where do you send them to go?
Yeah, at Taylor Holiday on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm always happy to chat. It's a rad community. Whatever the banter is, I will say that my experience has been an incredibly gracious group of people who are super willing to help in almost every interaction that I've had. So very, very excited to meet people there.
Taylor, thank you so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it. Great to hang with you, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.